the President of the United States.
2 weeks ago, President Biden gave his first State of the Union address. In front of hundreds of government officials and millions of viewers around the world, he delivered remarks on important matters of the day. But why do presidents do this? Who started this weird annual tradition? Who are all those people in that giant room, and what is the meaning of this ceremony? Once again, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Presidential History. The origin of the State of the Union address is much older than the United States itself. An annual speech given by a head of state to their nation's legislative body is a tradition that goes all the way back to the 14th century. This practice originates with a speech from the throne, usually given by a sitting monarch or their vice-regal representative to both chambers of their respective houses of parliament. This is where the joint session of Congress comes from. Instead of senators and representatives meeting together, it's an adaptation of the congregation of the peers and commons in the English Parliament. The annual royal oration almost always acted as a formal opening of the parliamentary session for that year. The speech usually lays out the policy objectives of the monarch for the coming year, usually written by the Premier's cabinet. The tradition of the state opening of Parliament continues mostly just in the United Kingdom and in the Commonwealth realms. This tradition of the branches of government coming together was favored by the Founding Fathers. They saw it as the perfect ceremony to lend authority and legitimacy to the novel form of republican government. In accordance with this, a clause was added to the Constitution, ordering the President to, from time to time, give to the Congress information of the State of the Union and provide policy suggestions for the coming term. On the 8th of January, 1790, President Washington gave the first State of the Union address to Congress at Federal Hall in New York City. As noted by Mount Vernon, the address covered matters of defense, foreign policy, economics, education, and immigration-related topics. This tradition continued until 1801, when the ever-righteous President Jefferson discontinued the practice, calling it too monarchical. This coming from the same man who answered the White House front door in his pajamas and bathrobe. After this break with constitutional protocol, President Jefferson decided to start a new tradition of presidents writing an annual report to Congress that was read to the members by a clerk of the House. In 1913, President Woodrow Wilson revived the practice of delivering the speech in person once again, seeing it as an opportunity to push his agenda and gain the favor of Congress in a more personal way. Since then, there has been a presidential address to Congress almost every year. In 1922, President Warren G. Harding's address to Congress was the first to travel the airwaves on radio. That's why the photographer patched in a small photograph of a little radio operator in your left-hand corner. It wasn't until President Calvin Coolidge's 1923 address that it was broadcast nationwide for all Americans to hear. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1936 address started the tradition of delivering his remarks upon nightfall and not during a legislative workday. President Roosevelt also changed the speech from a December affair to an early year event, usually occurring in January or February. Unfortunately for working Americans, this evening time slot was not filled again by the president until the 1960s. In 1947, President Truman's State of the Union address was the first to be televised, showing many Americans the inside of the Capitol building for the first time. 1968 was the first year to have media commentary follow the president's address, something we're very comfortable with here in the modern age. After President Carter's total and landslide defeat in 1981, the practice of an outgoing president delivering one last address to Congress ceased. However, the first speech that the new president delivered, which replaced the old one, shortly after their inauguration, is not called a State of the Union. And finally, in 1997, President Clinton's speech was the first that could be watched live on the internet. We'll see you next time here on Presidential History.